Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth.
Hello and welcome back to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. I'm Moses Brattrud with Grace Evans. We are so excited for this special episode because I think that it's one that will be really helpful and important. And the topic is the best arguments.
Air quotes.
Best air quotes arguments for abortion. So when we come into the space of debating whether abortion is permissible, there are a lot of arguments that you'll hear. Some of them are particularly stupid. Some of them need to be thought about. And they need to be addressed, and they need to be refuted and debunked. And thankfully, we have the perfect person to do that, and that is Grace Evans, pro-life activist and excellent co-host. So, Grace, I'm going to ask Grace some of the biggest pro-abortion arguments, some of them that they're saying, oh, pro-lifers can't, they just don't have a reply to that.
This. Yeah.
And then Grace is going to respond to those and give a great pro-life answer to each one. And the benefit of her doing that is then that you, our listeners and viewers, can take that and take that with you. And if you maybe as the holidays approach, if you get into a discussion over a meal with relatives, and I don't recommend talking about abortion at the dinner table, but if it comes up, we hope that this episode will inspire you and prepare you to have that discussion even more so than you're already prepared to have the discussion.
Because if we're not armed with the truth, then how can we expect others to listen to us? Like, if we don't have a response prepared, then how are we going to be able to fight for the preborn? And if you want to, you can follow me on Instagram. I have a highlights, I think it's like pro-choice arguments. You can follow me on there for shorter versions of all these arguments. I think I've debunked so many over the past few years, and I have them all saved in my profile. Yeah. But this will be more fleshed out, and hopefully just serve you guys. That's our goal with this whole podcast, especially this episode. And can I just say, Moses, I'm so thrilled that we're doing this episode. There is nothing I like more than debunking pro-choice arguments.
Yes.
Like, it gets me fired up.
Yes.
So if I get fired up in this episode, we know why.
I'm going to, like, if it gets a little heated,
because
I'm going to be, I'll be playing devil's advocate a little bit, and so if it gets a little heated, that's because of the force of these arguments, and I think that'll be helpful.
And Moses might jump in too at some point and give more his perspective too.
Yes, because as a man, I have a unique perspective.
We don't believe in the whole. We'll talk about this. No uterus, no opinion. We do not believe in that. No. It's such a bad argument. Without further ado, though, Moses.
Yeah. So I want to start off by, before we get into the arguments, I want to start off by asking you, how did you get involved in the cause of pro-life activism?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think a lot of people believe that I'm really active in politics and I love just politics in general. In reality, I do care about politics because I care about how it impacts us, and that's how it's going to impact America's future and our children, which is why I'm blessed to be co-host of this podcast. But I don't think I would have gotten into politics if it wasn't for abortion. And I want to make this clear too. Abortion isn't something that should be political. It's become political, but it's definitely a moral issue.
Right.
And so that's why I got involved. But I think this was in high school. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, as so many high schoolers do, right? I feel like there is this insane pressure, honestly, in high school to know where you want to go to college, what major you want, if you want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars.
Right.
On your degree, and there's just this pressure, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to do something that would be impactful because I knew I couldn't go to a job where I just did paperwork or did something that didn't really matter and doesn't really change the world or impact the culture. And so I started thinking about it. I started thinking, where can I make the most impact for Christ? Where can I use my God-given talents in the best ways? And I think, all of this kind of happened sophomore, junior year of high school when I was thinking through these things. Number one, I'd always kind of wanted to go to law school. So that was in the back of my mind, and I knew I wanted to fight for the innocent in some way, in some capacity. And then I started listening to The Briefing with Al Mohler, and that's what really got me into politics, so to speak. And I always really loved his segments on abortion.
Yeah.
And then I got connected with Lila Rose because of our friend Bruce Smith from Alliance Defending Freedom.
Yeah.
So
I
she
didn't
does
know
messaging.
that.
Yeah, so
Okay.
she came to visit and did like a messaging seminar with us, taught us how to do messaging well, and she mentioned that she had connections with Live Action and Lila Rose, and I thought that was amazing. And so she introduced me through email to her and to Allison Senefante, who's their Director of External Affairs. And for the first time, I went on Instagram and I followed Live Action. And I saw their stuff. I saw how excellent the work they did, how it was so excellent, and everything they did I just loved. And around the same time, I started listening to Allie Beth Stuckey, and this was when she was starting to get bigger. She had been pretty small. She was still pretty small when I started listening to her, and then she grew exponentially. And she's an amazing conservative commentator and mom and wife. Back then, she didn't have any kids. But I started listening to her, too, and she talked about abortion a lot, too. And I started putting all these things together, and I knew that I wanted to do something that mattered, right? There's this quote, I don't remember who said it, but I love it. It's, if not us, then who? If not now, then when?
Yeah.
And I love that. I think that might have been my senior quote. And I think it's so accurate. I mean, if we're not going to rise up as Christians, then who is going to rise up? And I think it's so easy for us to get comfortable with the idea of abortion, which I pray that it's never going to be the case for me, because when I started really truly learning about what abortion is through Live Action's informational videos and articles, my eyes became so open, because I always believed it was wrong, but I never actually researched it for myself until I got connected with them. And I knew that I had to do something about it, because it brought me to tears, and it still does. And there's this quote from Mother Teresa, and she says, "We must not be surprised when we hear of murders, of killings, of wars and hatred. If a mother can kill her own child, what is left but for us to kill each other?
Wow.
A nation that kills its children in the womb has lost its soul." And so that really just encapsulates why I care about the pro-life movement and why I'm so passionate about it, because I'm not fighting for myself. I get nothing out of this. That's what the pro-life movement is about. It's for fighting for the most vulnerable when others are not bold enough to do so. And I really think there's this huge movement of Christians who agree that abortion's wrong, right? But they'll pray about it, but will they act? They often don't act, which saddens me. And so that's kind of how I got involved with it. And then going into my senior year of high school, I think I started interning the summer after I graduated, actually. I started interning for Minnesota Family Council in public policy, worked with Meredith Campbell, our then policy director, who's amazing. And from there on, I just kept doing different positions here at MFC until I landed here in the communications department, which is my favorite.
Thank you.
Yep, it's great working with Moses. So yeah, that's kind of the shortish version of how I got involved and just why I'm so passionate about fighting for the preborn.
That's awesome. I don't think I had ever heard that story in full before. That's so cool. Okay, so we have a lot of arguments. I'm just going to jump right in.
Yeah, we have
so let's say that I recently talked to someone who's kind of like this. Let's say that I say to you, I'm personally pro-life. I don't support abortion, but I think it should be legal. What would you say to that?
That's a great question. We have an Unwoke video on this, so we'll definitely have that on the screen and linked in the description.
And this is a super common thing. Like President Joe Biden, before he was president, that would have been the position he would have taken.
And that is the number one pro-choice response I get on Instagram or talking in person with people. There are a few that I get the most, and that is probably the most common one. Here's the thing. There's a lot of things I could say about this, but first and foremost, if you don't like abortion, then don't get one, which is what they're saying. That's an imposition of a preference on an action that is fundamentally wrong. So it's like child abuse or rape. You can't say, if you don't like child abuse, don't abuse children, or if you don't like rape, don't rape anyone. That's clearly fallacious. And so no evangelical would claim, like, I don't support murder or rape, but I support each person's right to choose that if it's right for them.
Right.
No one would say that.
Right.
And so if something's wrong for one person, it's wrong for everyone. It's morally wrong. And our government, as we know, was founded on the belief that the government ought to protect the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of each and every citizen. I'm studying that in school right now. Actually, it's fascinating. But as we know, without the right to life, every other right is actually meaningless. And so there's the pro-life movement, too, also defines what it means to be pro-life. And we need to remember that. We can't let the pro-choicers define it. Like, oh, you're not pro-life if you don't allow women to choose what they want to do.
Right.
The pro-abortion movement does not get to define that. And so truly it's hypocritical if you're going to say, I believe abortion's wrong. In this case, like for me, I wouldn't choose that. Well, why? That is precisely why it's wrong, why you wouldn't choose abortion, because it's murder and you know it's murder. The reason that many have hesitations about abortion is the very reason that it's truly wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really good. I think it's just so clear. I think, like, there's a lot of people who just haven't thought about it. Or if
Right.
they've thought about it, they've thought about it from the perspective of a woman who is dealing with unplanned pregnancy. And yeah, that's a scary thing to be dealing with. And so that's where you give yourself that distance and you're like, well, that I would never do that. But if other people want to do that, I'm going to, la, 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 I'm just going to plug my ears and just ignore that's happening. And what you're saying is, no, that's not a preference. That is a moral, it's something that is morally wrong. And when we see that, as you said earlier, we cannot stay silent.
Right. And when something's morally wrong, it's morally wrong for everyone, like I said.
Just period.
Funny story, though, about this, actually. I know a local coffee shop owner down where my parents live in Minnesota, and every time I walk in, he's usually working because he's like the owner and everything. And one time I was wearing one of the live action shirts that says women's rights begin in the womb. And I was ordering, and we usually talk about random stuff, but he was like, wow, I love your shirt, women empowerment, feminism. And I was like, actually, this is a pro-life shirt, and I was able to share the pro-life message with him. And then he was like, well, I do agree with you, but I'm just personally pro-life. And so that's where I had this conversation with him.
Yeah.
And he actually said, I never really thought about it that way. That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing your opinion. I think my mind might have been changed.
Wow.
So that was really awesome. And so that's why I also love wearing pro-life stuff. I mean, definitely, I've heard some of my friends have like pro-life bumper stickers on their cars, and their cars will get keyed or whatever, which is, I know, crazy.
Yeah.
So anyways, don't know that this argument is very common, but just always bring it back to the humanity of the preborn. That's how you win every pro-life argument, is bring it back to what the preborn is. They're a living human, and what abortion is and what abortion does to the child.
That's great. So even beyond these pro-abortion arguments, what Grace is saying is, when you get into a discussion, focus on the life of what is in the womb. What is that? Is it a clump of cells? Or is it a human child?
Always do away with the euphemisms, because the euphemisms, like abortion, okay, abortion, what is that? Or women's health care. Well, both of those are murder. So make sure you can cut through the noise and cut through the narrative, because when they start using euphemisms, most pro-choicers don't even know what an abortion actually is step by step. They just think, oh, it's a procedure like going in to get your teeth cleaned, and that's really not the case. So often when they watch videos or when they hear what abortion truly does to a child, they're shocked and they don't think it's actually right, or they think it should be limited to the first trimester.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So let's jump into one of, I think, the hardest arguments that many people who are pro-life and many people who are really sincerely pro-life, they really have trouble with this one, and it's understandable. So I'll start off by saying this is very rare, but in certain cases you'll have a rape that ends up in the conception, and then you have a woman who is a child conceived in rape. And many people will say that there should be exceptions to abortion law for children, for women who have been raped. How would you respond?
Yeah, and that's the same. They use that same argument with incest too. So this answer, will kind of cover both of those. First and foremost, rape is a terrible act. It's heinous, and I can't imagine going through that. And your first response when you're talking with someone who's bringing this up, first of all, notice that they may have even been raped themselves. So your first response needs to be one of compassion, and you need to acknowledge the hurt that women go through when they're raped and how it's evil. So first, I believe that rapists should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. And I actually am pro-death penalty for rapists who are convicted. Which is controversial, but that's besides the point. But that's the point. I think it's a terrible thing. However, again, like Moses said, abortion in the case of rape is less than 1% of all abortions. And so it's very, very rare. And so when pro-choicers come and they bring this argument to the table, they're trying to use this less than 1% to justify the other 99%. So keep that in your mind. But also, in response to this, ask yourself why an innocent child should be punished for the crimes of his father. Never would we, if something happened and the child was already born, never would you kill a child because his father did something. The father would go to jail. The father would be incarcerated. And so really what this comes down to is that every single life is precious, and having abortion, after a woman has been raped, what she deserves is compassion and care and love and support. That's what she needs and craves.
Yes.
What she does not need, Moses, is more injustice heaped onto her. And abortion is another injustice. One, it will take the life of her child, but secondly, it actually hurts women, hurts them physically, but it also can hurt them in the future mentally when they look back on that moment with grief and despair, realizing that the life that was ended was her own precious child.
Right.
And so why would we give women a solution that isn't actually going to solve anything after they've gone through this horrific act?
Yeah.
And also, I'll just close with this. The injection for most abortions, the saline injection, is the same as what you'd inject to a murderer. So why would we inject a poison into an innocent child, which is the same poison that we would give to murderers?
In lethal injection.
A lethal injection. And so this is a very hard topic, of course,
Yeah.
and always approach with compassion. But I think that's what we need. We need to hold on to the humanity of the preborn again, and the fact that abortion is not going to take away the trauma. It will only add to the trauma that women are facing.
Yeah. I think, like, when we, as Grace said, when we focus on the life of the preborn, then the preborn is alive and has rights, and we have responsibilities toward those children in the womb, however the circumstances of conception took place. So, like, that just does not change. So I think that's great. So when we come to abortion, the largest abortion provider in the country is Planned Parenthood, and we've talked some about Planned Parenthood, what they do here in Minnesota and nationally on the podcast, and you'll often hear that that women need Planned Parenthood.
Right.
And that they just provide all these services that apparently you can't get elsewhere. So what would you say to that?
This is probably my favorite one to debunk because it's so easy to debunk. You know, it's so easy. I wrote an article on this. Our producer will put it on the screen, and we will also link it. This in like 2018, 2019 when I was doing public policy. And here's the deal. People like to argue all the time, women need Planned Parenthood because they do so much more than abortion, and abortion is only 3% of what Planned Parenthood does. So if you take away Planned Parenthood, women will have nowhere to go for their free health care. That's the argument. I looked into the stats. These are from Planned Parenthood's annual reports, so this is straight from them, the things that they release. Planned Parenthood does less than 2% of the national breast exams, less than 1% of Pap tests, less than 2% of cancer screenings, but they perform more than 34.9% of our nation's abortions.
Wow.
Which is much more than that 3%. So you might be asking, like, where do they get that 3% number? How come everyone always talks about the 3%?
Yeah.
What they do is they actually divide the total number of services by the number of abortions they provide. So when a woman comes in for an abortion, she also takes a pregnancy test. There's also an ultrasound that only the abortion workers can see, of course, not the woman. And there's a plethora of other services she's doing.
Right.
Even though she came in for the abortion, they're going to count all of those other services along with the abortion. So they're like, oh, abortion was only like 1/6 of the thing that she came in for.
That sounds like what they call creative accounting.
Right. And so with statistics, always with statistics, you need to be careful. Look at the graph, look at what they're actually comparing, and look at their actual report, because statistics are very easy to manipulate. So where would women be able to go? Like, let's say Planned Parenthood doesn't really offer that much besides abortion, which is true because abortion makes the most money. Planned Parenthood also covers up sex trafficking of innocent young girls. They offer sex traffickers financial aid and other resources, which is not pro-women. They have monthly abortion quotas, which they push each of their facilities to surpass.
Wow.
And they're rewarded with pizza parties and time off when they meet those quotas.
Oof.
And pushing women to have abortions because of quotas is not pro-women. So why would we send our women to these terrible facilities that, one, are lying about the services they provide, are pushing their employees to perform abortions because they get the most money and are aiding sex trafficking. The answer is we should not send our women here. Where should we send our women? We should send them to nationally, federally qualified health centers, which are located across the nation, which in 2017, this is when I wrote this article, I'm sure the numbers have slightly changed. These have performed cervical cancer screenings, over 1 million, over 700,000 mammograms, and they increased their contraceptive services by about 14% in 2017, which is lots of services. And so in reality, we have federally qualified health centers that outnumber Planned Parenthood on a scale of 20 to 1 across the nation. And so women don't need Planned Parenthood. The bottom line is they don't need Planned Parenthood. What they actually deserve is healthcare centers that will give them quality healthcare and hope, compassion, and truth, which is what women deserve.
Yes.
And I know that women are strong enough to be told the truth about their body, about their baby, and about their healthcare.
Yeah.
And Planned Parenthood lies to women. They will not give them the truth. They will never give them the truth. And that is inherently anti-women because women are strong enough to be told the truth. So that would be my answer in a nutshell there. But again, we will have the article linked below so that they can read that in its full.
Yeah, that's excellent, Grace. Yeah, I think it's just dismantling the fact that the idea that Planned Parenthood is somehow the only clinic that provides these services when actually they primarily exist to do this one thing, which is murder. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about a couple more philosophical arguments for abortion. And one of them, and this is a big one, is that we just don't know when life begins. I mean, you'll hear some people say, and essentially the pro-abortion logic is that the abortion that life begins when you can through the magic of the birth canal, and like the baby comes out into the world and suddenly it's alive and it has rights.
From Choice for Two?
Oh, I don't know if I have.
Amazing. Okay, I'll show it to you later.
Okay.
Check it out, guys.
We'll have it in that. We'll have it in the description.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay.
So Grace, you're having a discussion with someone, and they say, well, how can we regulate abortion when we just don't know when life begins? What would you say to that?
Here's the deal. There was a time in history when we could have claimed that. There was a time in history when we didn't truly know when life began because we didn't have the medical advancements, the technological advancements. But now, this is why it is so disgusting that abortion is still legal. We have absolutely no excuse. We know when life begins, and we know that a baby is a human from the moment of conception. And how do we know this? 95%, more than 95% of scientists across the world agree that life begins at conception. And not only that, but Harvard and Princeton have published many articles stating that life begins at conception. It's in almost every single scientific textbook. The only ones that disagree are very progressive, very new, and the reason they would claim that life doesn't begin at conception is because of abortion. And so if you're going to claim that you don't know when life begins, you are not only anti-truth, you are anti-science. And the interesting thing is the proponents that will say, well, we don't know when life begins, they are so pro-science with everything else. They're like, science, 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 science is real. We base everything off of science and nothing on religion. But in reality, they deny the most fundamental scientific fact that life begins at conception. So we absolutely know when life begins. We can detect a heartbeat as early as 6 weeks sometimes. And it's just amazing. We have ultrasounds. We can see the preborn child moving. And to deny when life begins, again, is to deny science. And I think you have to bring it back to that.
That's great. And so like what Grace is doing is she's saying, what we can do is we can point to these scientifically verifiable things that everyone can and should agree on. Like before we understood the science of DNA, we did not know that each individual child had, from the moment of conception, unique DNA that no one else in the world has or will ever have, and that it combines the genetic material of both parents. And now, Grace is not saying that we didn't know as Christians that we didn't know that life began at conception, like the Bible talks about forming us in the womb.
But I'm saying, I don't use the Bible as a textbook for the pro-life case. I can use it to support, of course, but I don't need to. I can win the pro-life argument.
When you're making a pro-life argument, you're often arguing with people who don't share your belief in the Bible, and that's why it's so important to do what Grace is doing, to talk about things that to find that common ground, and then say you believe in science, right? Well, look, this is what science says. I want to say one side note. I had a friend on Twitter who was tweeting about different Christian theories over the years of how or when life began, and various people throughout history have put forward different theories. And one of my favorites, and the Reformers, Luther and Calvin, believed this, and then some church fathers also believe this, was Traducianism, is called, and the idea is that the soul is. So life begins at conception because the soul is created in a sense by the moment of conception. So the soul, the child is ensouled, as this phrase goes, just at the very moment of conception. That is a being with a unique soul, because the mother and the father don't just contribute to the physical creation of the child, but also to the spiritual creation of that child, of that soul, because preborn children have souls, just coming from a Christian perspective.
Yeah.
So for many, many centuries, Christians have believed that abortion, that life begins at conception. That is not a new thing that Christians discovered when ultrasound technology came out.
Or even people in general. Like, most people agreed that life began at conception. It's only until recently that progressives have started trying to redefine the terms, because if it's absolutely heinous to assert that, yes, the child in the womb is a human from the moment of conception, but I still think it's right to murder the child. And I hear more and more people claiming that now. That's becoming more mainstream. And at least those people are being honest. At least they're honest about what they're supporting. Whereas other people are either being lied to or they're lying to themselves.
That's so good. So I want to take that one step further. I want to put forward to you
the best argument.
The best argument. So this is supposedly one of the best arguments for abortion. It's a philosophical analogy. It's called the violinist analogy, and it was invented by a woman called Judith Jarvis Thompson. So I'm going to just read you a summary of this argument. I want to hear your response. So in the story, in the violinist analogy, a violinist in the original formulation, and I'm reading here from a website, prolife.stanford.edu, is dying. And the only way to prolong the life of this dying man, this violinist, is to hook him up to another human and to siphon off some of that person's blood or kidney function or something as a form of life support. He must remain in this state for several months, necessary for medical technology to reach the point that it can intervene and completely resuscitate him. So music lovers, in their zeal to save the violinist, find some random woman who happens to be the only person in the world with the right blood type for this to work. And as she sleeps in bed, they hook her up to the violinist without her consent. The woman wakes up to find herself strapped down to the bed and attached as a form of life support to a complete stranger, essentially a human parasite lying next to her. Unless she severs the tube, she can't move or go anywhere indefinitely, forced to have her energy siphoned off by the parasite. So the idea is that the situation is analogous to an unplanned pregnancy. Against her plans, the woman finds herself supporting the life of an unwanted person and has the right to deprive that person of her bodily support, regardless of what the result is for the parasite / violinist / unborn child. So what do you think about that? How would you respond?
This argument, interestingly enough, I guess a lot of pro-choicers will say this is the best one, but I have a lot of pro-life and pro-choice people that follow me on Instagram, and people never ask me about this one. Like, I don't know why.
So this is not a common argument that you're going to hear around the dinner table.
And I think the reason it's not common is because it just would never happen, right? So it's like, okay. But I can still debunk it, okay? So Thompson, the author here, is counting on a certain moral intuition, a certain sense of justice, and our pathos rising to the surface here and feeling the plight of the poor kidnapped woman used as a host against her own will to support the life of this random stranger. So our emotions are taken captive here, and we're like, oh my gosh, this poor woman, and I think most of us, if not all, would agree that this woman is not morally obligated to stay on the lifeline with this person. I think the blood is being transfused. Is that the analogy?
In the analogy, yeah.
Yep. So we feel the sense of we just have a sense of emotion for her. Now the key question in any slippery slope argument and appeal is always whether the two situations are actually similar.
Yes. In
a morally relevant way. If
this is not, analogy, but is this analogy actually analogous to abortion?
If not, then the illustration of this analogy is guilty of the slippery slope fallacy, where it's trying to make you feel like this is the same thing, but it's actually not, and then the argument falls apart, right? So let's take a look at this. Thompson is arguing here that the child is not merely a stranger. She's arguing that it's a violent assailant of the mother that needs to be warded off in an act of self-defense. And so this plays off of the pro-choice argument that a child is an invader and a parasite that lives off of the mother. So let's just think about that for a minute. A child is not a parasite because from the moment of conception, the child has a unique DNA, and humans can only beget humans. So a child is not a parasite, and it is the most natural place for a child to be is within its mother's womb. A mother's womb is the baby's natural environment and habitat, and no one can come into this world without that. And so what she wants us to believe is that the child growing inside of the woman is trespassing, and that when one is trespassing, one is not in its rightful place, right? But the baby in developing in the womb actually belongs to her, and the mother's womb should be the safest place in the world for a baby. But unfortunately, it's the most dangerous. So it's not the same because she's comparing a stranger to a parasite, quote unquote, right?
And can I add to this?
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
Also another thing that would need to change for the story to be analogous would be that, so in the analogy, the woman is asleep and this thing happens to her and she's completely passive and in fact it's done completely against her will. But in the case of pregnancy, with the exception of rape and this
is controversial, right? To say this, but like consent to sex is consent to pregnancy.
Consent to sex is consent to pregnancy.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm going for. So the woman essentially is, in this analogy, if I could adapt it, she would have to take part in, let's say that she's filling out a survey, and she knows that a non-zero chance of her filling out the survey and turning it in would be that she would have the right blood type to be connected, and she's signing her name and saying, I consent to this. In that case, so let's say that there's a 5% chance or a 20% chance.
There's like a 3% at least chance
if you're
that you're going to get pregnant.
If you're on birth control, no system of birth control except abstinence is 100% effective at preventing pregnancy. So the woman, I would say that you have to modify the analogy and say the woman is essentially signing on the dotted line saying, I understand that if I am the donor needed to help this person in this life-threatening situation, then I accept the 5 to 20% or whatever chance that will be the case, and then I will consent. Because that is what pregnancy is. It is you are engaging in activity, sexual intercourse, that leads naturally to pregnancy in many cases. For the reason why all of us are here, we have to have the birds and the bees talk apparently with some of these pro-abortion arguments. So I don't want to cut off your train of thought, but because I think you're making an excellent point. But even coming back just to the beginning of the analogy, you need to talk about why that's just not accurate.
Right. And people could still use the argument of rape, though, in this. Like, okay, that's not consent to pregnancy, which I agree with. There's still different parallels that are inconsistent here. And so this analogy isn't good because the violinist illustration or analogy here is not parallel to pregnancy because it equates a stranger-stranger relationship, this random person to this random person, with a mother-child relationship, which is fundamentally different. Like,
excellent point.
When a child is born, right, Moses, a parent can't not feed their child. They can't not clothe or house their child because that would be child abuse, right?
Yeah.
And the police force would come in, the government would get involved, etc. The parents have a unique obligation and duty to protect the life of their children, whereas a random person wouldn't be prosecuted if a neighbor child starved in his house and the parent didn't know. The other parent didn't know. Right. But you would be responsible if your own child starved, right? And so there's that fundamental difference that parents are uniquely responsible for their children, and just because a child is within the womb does not mean that you can deprive them of that fundamental right.
Right.
Likewise, there's another difference here. Abortion is not just withholding treatment, right, from a child. It's actively taking another human being's life through poisoning or through dismemberment.
Yeah.
And a more accurate parallel, if we're going to use this argument, it would be to parallel abortion with like crushing the violinist's skull and then removing him from the life support or the bloodstream. That would be more parallel. So like I said, the reason that this is a flawed argument is it's a slippery slope. It's logically fallacious. And fundamentally, this is something I was talking to Moses about before we filmed the podcast, but every single person in the United States has the right to not be murdered. So children should have the right to not be murdered within the womb or without the womb. Everyone has the right to life, meaning you have the right to not be murdered by another person. However, no one has the right to not die, right? So you're not guaranteed that you'll never die. Actually, in fact, you're guaranteed that you will die at some point by natural death or by a car accident or some other form or cancer.
God forbid.
Yeah, right. And no one is guaranteed life. You are guaranteed the right to not be murdered, but you're not guaranteed life. And so this argument is equating these two things as the same thing when they're really not. And I think Ben Shapiro makes this point. There's a difference between an act of self-preservation, which would be this woman in this argument and in this analogy, versus an act of violence towards the most innocent.
That's crucial.
Women will not die if they have a child, in most cases. Women can sometimes die when they undergo an abortion, actually. And I think this argument, it doesn't specifically say the woman will die if she stays on life support. I think that's, at least her life force is being drained. But women aren't being drained in a pregnancy. Like, your body, if you're a woman, your body was literally made to hold life and sustain life. And so it isn't this burden or thing that you can't bear. It's hard. It's Eve's curse. I know it will be hard if I someday have children, and I'm not saying that it's not hard. It's very hard, but you're in most cases you will not die if you have a child. The Lord literally made your body to sustain life, and so that would be my response in a nutshell. So a lot of things to break down here, but fundamentally, if someone brings this up, bring it back to the humanity of the preborn, what abortion is, and then also bring it back to the fact that these are not parallel circumstances. And also this would literally never happen. Whenever pro-abortionists are like, oh, I have this fantastical argument and like blah, 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 this and this and this. Like, I don't know if you've heard the Petri dish argument. Like, no. Oh my gosh. Okay, maybe we'll talk about that in the next episode.
Okay.
But it's like, okay, these things would never happen. So if you have to resort to something fantastical and out of the blue to try to argue your point, you're wrong, and you're not on the side of truth. And so fundamentally, when it comes down to it, if you're in a situation and you're having a conversation with someone who's pro-choice, remember that you're on the side of truth. Truth is winsome, and truth will win. It's not that hard to win an argument when you're on the side of truth. And so be emboldened by that. You have everything you need to win the argument, but not only win the argument, win the person. Because my goal, whenever I'm conversing with people either in person or online, is not just to win the argument. I know I can do that because there is no good argument for abortion. My goal is always to win the person's heart over to the pro-life side. And oftentimes I see hearts and minds changing, which is a beautiful thing.
That's so wonderful. And I just want to say that unfortunately we're running out of time, and we have so many more interesting, not good, but interesting arguments for abortion that we want to equip you for. And so, but unfortunately we're running out of time. So what I want to do is cap this discussion for right now, and then we're going to do a second episode, a future episode, and we're going to come back to this, and we're going to get Grace's input on some of these final pro-abortion arguments, and then and we hope that will be helpful as well. So I want to just say thank you to Grace for presenting these well thought out and oftentimes scientifically proven reasons why abortion is wrong and should not be countenanced in a moral society. And we're going to be back with more in the future. And that's what the Family Beacon is for, to get you the facts so that you can stand for truth. I'm Moses Brattrud. This is Grace Evans from Minnesota Family Council. Thank you so much for watching and listening.
And keep on fighting for life.
Keep on fighting for life. And remember, if you are on iTunes, give us that 5-star review. We'd love to have that to show us that you love and enjoy this podcast. That helps it get in front of other people. And if you're on YouTube, hit that bell icon so that you get a notification every time we release a new episode. This is the Family Beacon from Minnesota Family Council. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.